Growing up, I always felt like I didn't belong in my own family. My dad, Paul, had a very clear favorite between my brother, Jake, and me. From as far back as I can remember, Jake was the golden child. He was the embodiment of everything my dad wanted in a son: tough, athletic, and unafraid of a little dirt or danger. Meanwhile, I was the complete opposite. I enjoyed reading, singing, and experimenting in the kitchen, which drove a wedge between my dad and me. It wasn't like I didn't try to bond with him. When I was younger, I'd attempt to play football with him, but I just wasn't any good at it. My dad's disappointment was palpable, and eventually he stopped trying. Slowly but surely, the distance between us grew, and before long I realized he just didn't love me the way he loved Jake. My mom, Diane, on the other hand, treated us equally. She was my biggest supporter, and I always gravitated toward her more. She understood me in a way my dad never could. But everything changed when I was in 8th grade. My mom passed away from cancer, and my world came crashing down. Her illness progressed so quickly that by the time we realized how serious it was already too late. Losing her devastated me, and in my grief I threw myself into cooking, the one thing that reminded me of her. My mom had been a phenomenal cook, and she often told me that if she hadn't taken over her dad's business, she would have pursued a career as a chef. Being in the kitchen became my escape, my therapy, and my way of keeping her memory alive. Unfortunately, my dad didn't see it that way. He hated my newfound passion and made no effort to connect with me. Instead, he doubled down on his favoritism for Jake. While I grieved, my dad and Jake buried their emotions and grew even closer, leaving me completely isolated. My dad constantly berated me for spending so much time in the kitchen, calling it unmanly and telling me to man up. One day he finally snapped. After finding me in the kitchen again, he threatened to make me do all the housework if I didn't stop cooking. He even told me to be more like Jake. That was the final straw. In the heat of the moment, I blurted out that he never loved me, and to my shock, he didn't even deny it. He agreed. That moment was a turning point. From then on, I stopped trying to earn his approval. I retreated into my room, pouring all my energy into perfecting recipes and studying culinary techniques. My dad and I barely spoke unless absolutely necessary, and Jake followed suit, ignoring me as if I didn't exist. After losing my mom, I had no one to lean on. I was completely alone. When it came time to apply for college, I knew I wanted to chase my dream of becoming a chef. I applied to some of the top culinary schools as well as a few traditional colleges to keep my options open. That summer, I secretly interned at a restaurant, gaining valuable experience and securing a glowing recommendation letter. My hard work paid off, and I was accepted into several schools, including one of the best culinary institutes in France. I was ecstatic, but my excitement was quickly overshadowed by dread. I knew I would need my dad's approval to go, and that meant asking him for financial support. I had no idea how he'd react, but I was prepared to beg if I had to. This was my dream, and I wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. I was determined to make my dream come true no matter what. I knew asking my dad for financial help would be a gamble, but I hoped against hope that he would support me. When I finally mustered the courage to tell him about my acceptance into one of the best culinary schools in France, I braced myself for rejection. I expected him to mock my career choice, calling it not masculine enough, but I was completely blindsided by what he said next. He told me flat out that he wouldn't be paying for my tuition, period. I was stunned. My dad wasn't struggling financially. In fact, he was well off and could have easily afforded to send me to France. So why was he refusing? His reason left me speechless. He said that paying for my tuition might make my younger brother, Jake, feel insecure. Jake was already struggling with his grades and focus, and my dad didn't want me outshining him. Hearing him say this shattered me. I couldn't believe that my own father would crush my dreams just to protect his favorite child's ego. I tried reasoning with him, explaining how much this opportunity meant to me, but he wouldn't budge. He even went as far as saying that Jake's well-being was his topmost priority, and that he couldn't support me competing with his son. I pleaded with him, begged him, and even broke down sobbing, but nothing worked. His mind was made up. Frustrated and heartbroken, I lost my temper and lashed out at him, saying things I'd kept bottled up for years. Finally, I stormed out of the house, vowing never to return. I moved in with my maternal aunt Linda, my late mother's older sister. The only reason I hadn't done this earlier was because I wanted to stay in the house where I'd grown up with my mom. Changing schools so close to graduation was also something I had wanted to avoid. When I told my aunt what had happened, she was furious with my dad. I felt terrible asking her for financial help, especially since she wasn't wealthy like my father, but Linda didn't hesitate. She reassured me that she would find a way to make it work. True to her word, my aunt rallied her friends, and together they managed to gather the funds I needed to attend my dream culinary school. I promised myself that I would make every penny worth it. While in France, I worked part-time jobs to ease the financial burden and repay some of the kindness shown to me. I threw myself into my studies and worked harder than ever. By the time I graduated, I was one of the top students in my class and landed a job at a prestigious French restaurant within months. Grateful for all that my aunt had done for me, I sent half of my salary back to her every month to repay the debt she had taken on for my education. I was incredibly fortunate not to have student loans hanging over me, which allowed me to focus entirely on my career. After working in France for a few years and saving diligently, I decided it was time to return home and chase my ultimate goal: opening my own restaurant. Back in the States, I worked as the head chef at a high-end restaurant while planning my next move. After years of hard work and careful planning, I finally made my dream a reality. A few weeks ago, I opened the restaurant I had always envisioned, and I couldn't be prouder. Two close friends I had met in France joined me as co-owners, and together we poured our hearts and souls into the business. Choosing a name for the restaurant was easy. I decided to honor my mother by naming it after her. Her name was not only beautiful and unique, but also held deep sentimental value for me. Thankfully, my business partners agreed wholeheartedly. The restaurant, situated in our home city, was a tribute to her and everything she had inspired in me. Before officially opening our doors to the public, we hosted a private party for a select group of guests. I made sure to invite my aunt and a few of her friends who had helped fund my education. The night was filled with laughter, love, and gratitude. It was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. I also invited a few close friends from school, but that was about it. For obvious reasons, I didn't invite my father or brother. Even if I'd wanted to, it wouldn't have been possible, as I hadn't spoken to them since leaving home, and neither had they made any effort to reach out. Truthfully, I thought we were all better off this way. However, I should have known better. Eventually, they would show up to ride the coattails of my success. And that's exactly what happened at the party. An hour before the event was set to begin, my dad and brother arrived. They weren't stopped by security since they shared my last name and claimed they were there to surprise me. While they succeeded in that regard, I was absolutely shocked when I saw them. My father and brother greeted me warmly, as if the years of estrangement and hurt had never happened. For the first time in my life, they acted like a normal, loving family. I was so stunned that I just stood there, frozen. Thankfully, my business partners noticed my discomfort. After politely greeting my father and brother, they tactfully excused themselves to give us privacy. I appreciated their sensitivity. Before I could even process what was happening, my dad presented me with a gift: a portrait of my mother. He proudly announced that he'd commissioned it specifically for me to hang in the restaurant. He claimed that as soon as he heard about a new restaurant with this particular name opening in our city, he just knew it had to be mine. He even said he'd always known I had it in me. My brother quickly chimed in, showering me with praise and telling me how proud he was of my accomplishments. The whole thing felt surreal. Their sudden enthusiasm and praise set off alarm bells in my mind. I remained quiet, letting them talk, all the while waiting for the real reason they had shown up. And sure enough, it wasn't long before they revealed their true intentions. It turned out that my brother, the so-called golden child, was now working as a bartender. He'd landed the job only because my dad had pulled some strings with a friend who owned a club. My brother's grades had steadily declined through high school and college, and he hadn't managed to secure any of the high-paying positions my dad had envisioned for him. Even worse, he'd slacked off during his high school football games, blowing any chances of earning a sports scholarship. Ironically, the golden child had ended up attending community college, something my dad had once scorned. They had come to ask me for a favor. My dad wanted me to make my brother a partner in the business, giving him a respectable position he hadn't earned. Hearing this, I had to suppress the urge to laugh out loud. Instead, I calmly told them I would think about it. Of course, I had no intention of entertaining their ridiculous request, but I didn't want to turn them away just yet. I decided to let them stay for the party because I had a far better plan in mind, a plan to expose their hypocrisy and show everyone who they really were. They seemed satisfied with my response, oblivious to what was coming next. As the evening went on and guests began to arrive, I busied myself with hosting duties. Meanwhile, my dad and brother mingled with the crowd, boasting about me to anyone who would listen. Their shameless audacity left me both amused and disgusted. By the time the party was in full swing, everyone we'd invited was present, and the atmosphere was lively. Toward the end of the evening, it was time for the hosts, my business partners and me, to give a toast. My partners went first, delivering heartfelt speeches about our journey and the restaurant. Then it was my turn to speak, and I was ready to make this a night my dad and brother wouldn't forget. I was finally ready to speak my heart out. I began by thanking all my guests and raising a toast to my mother. She was the reason I'd ever dared to dream of success. I firmly believed that her faith in me as a child had laid the foundation for everything I had achieved. That faith stayed with me even after she was gone, giving me the courage to push forward. After paying my respects to my mom, I moved on to the more difficult part of my speech. I shared how I'd had to borrow money from my aunt and her friends to attend culinary school, and expressed my deep gratitude to them for believing in me when no one else did. Then I addressed the elephant in the room, my father and brother. I revealed to everyone why I had needed that loan in the first place. I spoke about growing up with a father who had never shown me love or believed in me, a man who had always ridiculed my interest in cooking because it didn't align with his idea of masculinity. I talked about my younger brother, a carbon copy of my dad, and how I had been made to feel like I didn't belong in my own family. I recounted how my father had refused to pay for my education, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he didn't want me to outshine his golden child. That rejection had forced me to leave home, but despite everything, I had risen above it all to achieve my dreams. I sarcastically added that perhaps my family deserved some credit for creating those hardships because they had revealed how resilient I truly was. As I spoke, I noticed a mix of reactions in the crowd. Many of the guests shot my father and brother nasty looks, and even they seemed to have the decency to look ashamed, though I doubted the sincerity of their guilt. After finishing my speech, I walked over to my dad and brother. To their surprise, I hugged them. It was all part of the act. I played the same game they had when they arrived, pretending we were all on good terms. Turning back to the crowd, I announced that because my dad and brother had come to celebrate my success, I had forgiven them for the past. I even said I was willing to offer my brother a job as a bartender at the restaurant. The guests, believing this to be a heartfelt reconciliation, clapped and cheered for me. Some even whistled. Only my family and I knew the truth. This was my way of serving them the humiliation they had long deserved. Of course, they had no choice but to smile and feign gratitude, even though I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. They couldn't afford to storm out and cause a scene, which made my victory all the sweeter. Once the party ended and the crowd dispersed, my dad and brother confronted me outside the restaurant. They were furious. My brother's face was red, and his eyes were brimming with angry tears. They demanded to know why I had done this to them, saying that if I never intended to make my brother a partner, I should have turned them away from the start. I couldn't help but laugh. I told them that this was my way of repaying them for everything they had done to me over the years. It was exactly what they deserved. Then I turned on my heel and walked away. My brother shouted after me, calling me cruel and promising that I'd regret this someday, but I didn't care. By then I was already in my car driving home. That all happened a couple of days ago. Since then I haven't heard from them. My aunt, while supportive, believes I went too far and should have simply turned them away initially. But I don't agree. What I did felt justified, and honestly it brought me closure. Yeah, my brother exaggerated the story to make himself look like the victim, which honestly isn't surprising. Normally I wouldn't care about petty rumors, but when it comes to potential customers taking these lies seriously, it becomes a problem. I sent him a text warning him that if he didn't stop spreading falsehoods about me and my restaurant, I'd ensure he lost his current job as well. I'm hoping that's enough to shut him up because I'm too busy with work to deal with their unnecessary drama right now. Update. LOL, my brother texted back saying he'd stop only if I made him a partner. I can't even fathom the level of idiocy and entitlement here. If he really wants to be a partner, isn't badmouthing the same restaurant he wants to join the dumbest strategy ever? I'm convinced this is my dad's latest tactic to secure a cushy position for his golden child without him lifting a finger. Unfortunately for them, that's not going to fly with me. I told my brother that if he didn't stop his nonsense, he'd be hearing from my lawyers. I also made it crystal clear that he's in absolutely no position to negotiate with me. The only reason I haven't already taken legal action is because I don't want to get bogged down in unnecessary drama. But if he pushes me any further, I'll have no qualms about taking him to court. I warned him that this was his final chance to back off, for his own good. It's been about a month since my last update. My brother finally stopped badmouthing me, but that didn't stop my father and him from trying another stunt. A few weeks ago, they showed up at my house, thinking they could intimidate me into submission. They tried to threaten me, claiming they'd sue me for using my mother's name for the restaurant. They even claimed they'd already spoken to a lawyer, and insisted that I make my brother a partner if I wanted to avoid trouble. Of course, I called their bluff immediately. No reputable lawyer would ever take on such a ridiculous case. They conveniently forgot one crucial fact. My mother was my mom too, not just his wife, and there's no law preventing me from using her name to honor her memory. By this point, I'd had enough of their nonsense, so I told them if they didn't leave me alone, I'd be forced to call the cops. That's when my brother lost it. His face turned red, and he tried to grab me by the collar in a fit of rage. Luckily, my dad held him back before things could escalate further. I think the constant rejection and humiliation had finally gotten to him, and he snapped. Well, that's not my problem. They were lucky I didn't call the cops right then and there. I told them both to get out of my house, but my dad told my brother to go cool off in the car while he stayed behind to talk. When it was just the two of us, my dad tried to manipulate me, saying that if my mother were alive, she'd be heartbroken by how I was treating them. He urged me to bury the hatchet and move on. That was the last straw for me. I told him to leave me alone and to stop using my mother's name to guilt me into doing what he wanted. It was a low blow, and we were way past the point of reconciliation. Not once had either of them apologized for how they treated me. Not when they refused to support my dreams, not when they ridiculed me for years, and not now. I didn't understand why they thought I'd forgive them without even acknowledging their mistakes. As for my mother, I'm certain she would be ashamed of the way my dad treated me, and the way he's still trying to manipulate me. I know she'd be proud of the person I've become, and the success I've achieved despite all the obstacles they put in my path. Nothing my dad says will ever change that. At least my restaurant is thriving. Business is great, and if things continue to go well, we'll be expanding soon. It's satisfying to see my hard work paying off while my dad and brother stew in their own bitterness. As far as I'm concerned, they're no longer a part of my life, and I'm better off without them.